For a neutrality principle to work, it must be publicly announced and adhered to on a constant and faithful basis. Making an exception inexorably leads to pressure to make others and to allegations of bias. This is why we have public trust problems with universities right now. Alrighty. I meant to get this video out on Sunday, but as you might be able to tell, things changed around here in my lovely little setup. And that's the reason it took a little while, was because I needed to get my new setup done. My giant microphone is not here anymore. It's actually just off to the left side of the camera, which is a much nicer change because I like having the desk space now and not being so damn cluttered, as it were. So, let me know what you think. Let me know if I'm having any audio issues, because I am still troubleshooting that whole mess a little bit. So we'll see, but I figured this would be a good place to start. As you might recall, but anyway, the microphone thing is why I did not put out one extra piece of content last week, because I usually try to get at least 2 a week, but apologies on that. But let us see here. Last week, I talked briefly about statements versus actions with regards to the University of Michigan putting together a new statement on free expression principles on campus, yada, yada, yada. And talked a little bit about the notions, of course, that a statement is fine and lovely. Don't get me wrong. Statements are fine and lovely things most of the time. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything if there's not action behind it. And in that same vein, there's other things that came out last week also. That was a joint open letter to America's college trustees. As you can see from the title here, this was jointly written by the Heterodox Academy, the Academic Freedom Alliance, and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, formerly the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. But anyway, it became an important piece here to look at in light of previous things. And why, again, on this thing with higher education, why do I talk about this? Well, higher education is where we train the next generation of scientists. So if things go screwy there, things get screwed up with science in general. So hence the reason to actually consider it carefully what's going on and these kinds of statements and actions. So let us see here from the Heterodox Academy, February 7th. Open letter to America's college trustees. Politicized institutional statements threaten campus discourse. You can fix it. An open letter issued today, three organizations dedicated to defending free speech and open inquiry urged America's trustees and regents to put neutrality above politicized institutional statements that threaten open debate on college campuses. Oh, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I really just quick wanted to get something together for a particular moment so we could have a conversation about certain things also in addition to this, but let me get back to that. Rather than acting like sports announcers, naming a winner while the race is ongoing, college and university leaders should focus on paving the way for open and robust debate. The letter from the Academic Freedom Alliance, Heterodox Academy, and FIRE calls on trustees nationwide to adopt policies on institutional neutrality before the next school year. For those of you following along, the next school year begins in August of this year. Colleges and universities are increasingly weighing in on social and political issues that don't concern core academic matters or institutional operations, including abortion, race, climate change, and recently, the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. Such statements politicize debate and risk establishing an orthodoxy on campus, threatening the pursuit of knowledge for which higher education exists. Indeed. Correct statement. The pursuit of the truth. The highest and noblest goal of the university. Or at least it's supposed to be. Even if some statements seem non-controversial, issuing them creates an expectation that the college will weigh in on all social and political issues, at which point even a college's silence makes a statement. Trustees hold the ultimate authority to ensure colleges focus on truth-seeking, not truth dictating. Indeed. And this is important to note with this, is that it's not universities in particular are a place for exploring these kinds of ideas and things like that, and that is the purpose of seeking the truth. But you cannot do that if you are someone being told what to think. And as students and faculty grapple with important political and social issues, they should have the widest latitude to think the unthinkable and question the unquestionable, without the administrators assuming a monopoly on the truth by predetermining the right responses to contentious issues. Now, I want to make a point in this. Right responses to contentious issues. We're talking about the things of the day to which people are very, very much debating. We're not talking about something like gravity or anything like that. So just to make a point there. Quote, a top-down father knows best mentality is absolutely no way to support the next generation of free thinkers. Students and faculty deserve the freedom to experiment with different perspectives and explore entirely new ways of thinking without the college claiming to have done all the thinking for them. Greg Lukianoff. American colleges and universities need to keep the pursuit of knowledge their principal mission. A public pledge by the overseers of the colleges and universities that their schools will take no stance on the controversies of the day will also go a long way to restoring public confidence in the integrity of higher education. And this gets to the point. You may recall a while back on one of the videos I played Fareed Zakaria's take, which I never thought I would find myself agreeing with Fareed Zakaria, but he made a very good point in that as institutions tend to become more interested in the political issues of the day, people lose trust in them. Jonathan Haidt talked about that recently, actually, in a particular piece, and so I think it is important to recall that politicizing the institution is not necessarily a good thing. Now, I will add on this, of course, everything is political. Okay. You may recall this article, the In Defense of Merit article. They actually discussed this at length, this argument. Well, everything's a political anyway, so we just should bring the politics into it. Let's see. From the In Defense of Merit article as a reminder. The universalism of science does not preclude culture and politics from being involved in funding priorities. Funders, whether government or private, expect to receive a return on their investment, yet politicians should not dictate how science is done, nor how the university is run, and political agendas should not replace Mertonian norms, nor should they replace the truth-seeking of a university. History demonstrates the dangers of replacing merit-based science with ideological control and social engineering. In the Soviet Union, the USSR, the aberrations of Trofim Lysenko had catastrophic consequences for science and society. An agronomist and people's scientist who came from the superior class of poor peasants, in quotes with that, Lysenko rejected Mendelian genetics because of its supposed inconsistency with Marxist ideology. Yeah, Lysenko, I like, in history, I like contrasting two people, Trofim Lysenko and Thomas Sowell. Lysenko was trained as a scientist, but he became such an ideologue in Marxism that he ignored every bit of scientific evidence in front of him to say that his ideas were wrong. Thomas Sowell started his life as a Marxist, but as he wrote later and would talk about in interviews, he got hit with the fact that Marxism doesn't work, and so he stopped being a Marxist. That kind of thing worked. So those two are very opposites. Dissent from Lysenko's ideas was outlawed, and his opponents were fired or prosecuted. Lysenko's ideologically infused agricultural ideas were put into practice in the USSR and China, where in both countries they led to decreased crop yields and famine. Today, biology is being subjugated to ideology. Medical schools deny the basis of biological sex, biological basis of sex. Biology courses avoid teaching the heritability of traits, and so on. More examples of ideological subversion in science relevant to physics and chemistry were discussed in a recent viewpoint. Such analysis is often dismissed with vague deflections such as everything is political and everyone is biased. There is an element of truth to these declarations, which can help raise awareness about the potential of scientists to have biases, including biases on politicized topics, and help minimize such biases. However, those making these arguments often use them to impose their own ideological agendas on what can be studied and what kind of answers are permissible. It is this sense of the politicization of science that we categorically oppose. Which is to say, in the context of this, we recognize people have their political biases. What we're saying is that no one should be imposing them. And that includes the university's leadership with their preferred preferences should not be imposing that on their students and should not be imposing that on their faculty either. Hence the reason for the neutrality of the institution being a request here. Let's see. John Tomasi, president of Heterodox Academy, writes, quote, colleges and universities should be extraordinary places for the pursuit of knowledge. By adopting neutrality, university leaders empower students and professors to debate tough questions for themselves, allowing them to express heterodox opinions and consider unsettling data without fear of being silenced or punished. So, where's the actual letter itself for you if you're curious, just to see what it says. The Academic Freedom Alliance, Heterodox Academy, and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression are nonpartisan organizations dedicated to defending and advancing freedom of speech and open inquiry in higher education. We stand together in sending this entreaty to college and university trustees and regents across the country during this time of growing national concern about the fate and security of free thought on campuses. It is time for those entrusted with ultimate oversight authority for your institutions to restore truth-seeking as the primary mission of higher education by adopting a policy of institutional neutrality on social and political issues that do not concern core academic matters or institutional operations. In recent years, colleges and universities have increasingly weighed in on social and political issues. This has led our institutions of higher education to become politicized and has created an untenable situation whereby they are expected to weigh in on all social and political issues. Now, this particular thing goes back to what we're talking about over here. It's not that people can't have their political biases. That's not the issue. And it's not that people don't have their political biases. It's that you brought them in and made them part of everything. And that you seem to want it brought down on everyone else when you make those kinds of statements. Most critically, these stances risk establishing an orthodox view on campus, threatening the pursuit of knowledge for which higher education exists. As the University of Chicago's famous Calvin Report of 1967 states, a policy of institutional neutrality is premised on the defining mission of the university to pursue truth through, quote, the discovery, improvement, and dissemination of knowledge. And to accomplish this mission, quote, a university must sustain an extraordinary environment of freedom of inquiry and maintain independence from political fashions, passions, and pressures. End quote. Furthermore, the report recognizes, quote, there is no mechanism by which the university can reach a collective position without inhibiting the full freedom of dissent on which it thrives. In short, end quote. In short, individual faculty members and students are the, quote, instrument of dissent and criticism. The university, on the other hand, is, quote, the home and sponsor of critics. In other words, the university shouldn't say anything, but let the students and the faculty say what they please. Where to draw the line between institutional neutrality and position taking is a matter of careful prudential judgment. But as the Calvin Report notes, there should be a, quote, heavy presumption on the university taking a heavy presumption against the university taking collective action or expressing opinions on the political and social issues of the day. End quote. Smart observers will recognize good faith efforts to apply this principle. A useful maxim to guide decision makers is, quote, if an academic institution is not required to adopt a position in order to fulfill its mission of intellectual freedom or operational capacity, it is required not to opt a position. Princeton principles for campus-free inquiry, by the way. For a neutrality principle to work, it must be publicly announced and adhered to on a constant and faithful basis. Making an exception inexorably leads to pressure to make others and to allegations of bias. This is why we have public trust problems with universities right now. Critically, institutional neutrality applies only to leaders and units of institutions. This is true not only for the central administration, but also for the units of the university, such as schools, departments, centers, and programs. It does not apply to faculty members and students, either individually or as members of voluntary non-institutional associations. Given the need to prepare for the execution of an institutional neutrality policy, we call on you, the trustees and regents of America's colleges and universities, to publicly adopt such a policy by the beginning of the 2024-2025 academic year. We and the nation are watching campus events with keen interest and would applaud this fulfillment of your fiduciary duty. Now, the fiduciary duty thing is, of course, what is the fiduciary duty of a professor? Related thing that's talked about elsewhere, so I won't get into that. But again, lovely statement. Very much agree with it on sentiment. And if they don't follow through on that request, what is going to be done with that? That is the question that I have with this. How would the AFA and Heterodox Academy and FIRE respond? I mean, they don't have to follow, they don't have to honor that. But how would you respond to try and encourage them to do it? That is the question. I mean, you could start highlighting institutions that are just making, regular statements. Maybe that's something else FIRE could add, because FIRE holds the Scholars Under Fire database, but it also holds the college free speech rankings. Maybe they could come up with a way to say, these are the institutions that regularly make statements about X number of issues of the day whenever they happen. Those kinds of things. Maybe you can make that compiled list. So in principle, yeah, great statement. Great statement. And we should try not to politicize the institution as much as people themselves are themselves political. But yeah, it's an interesting challenge. And I will be curious to see how the three orgs here might be interested in getting universities and institutions to follow through, those trustees to follow through on that request to go for institutional neutrality. It's a nice sentiment, but I do wonder about some of the actions side of things there. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way to the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.